Okay, this is try two for my conversation with Dedeker Winston. Let's try this again. My name is Dr. Marie Tuine, and I'm a dating and relationship coach and a compersion researcher. Thank you all for your patience as we're navigating the technical glitches of Instagram, but we're gonna have a really exciting conversation today. So let's hope that Dedeker can pop up. I saw your request. Okay, great. I can see you. Can you see me?
No, I still can't see you, but I'll imagine you and just imagine you looking extremely beautiful and talented and intelligent. So,
Well, thank you. Okay, let's proceed without the visual then, but I think everyone else can see you and your beauty and your intelligence radiating. And I love your room, by the way. It's such a beautiful color.
thank you. Yeah, I really like. I guess I like to pretend that I live in an aquarium because that's the color I picked to paint the walls.
Oh, very calming. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this conversation. Just to give folks a little context, this came from an inquiry that I've been holding for a long time. Of course, it's no question that I'm really interested in compersion and jealousy and non-monogamy. And so much of my research that has ended up in my book has been more cognitive. Like, how do we really orient ourselves to a certain roadmap to navigate jealousy and compersion? And I'm a very mental person, so this is kind of an instinctive way of researching things. But lately I've been getting so many questions from people, wanting to have more of a somatic, embodied roadmap. Like, how do I make the shift between a more mental or attitudinal state of compersion to a really embodied one? And I think so many people are starting to orient towards somatics as a really important way of knowing. And I know that you, Dedeker, have been really orienting in that way. You've been leading retreats, like around somatics for non-monogamous folks. And you came to mind as someone that I really wanted to have a conversation with. I wanted to pick your brain about how do you work with people as well as a relationship coach and a retreat leader and all of that. So first of all, can you introduce yourself and what you do in the world?
Yeah, my name is Dedeker Winston. I'm one of the co-hosts and co-producers of the Multiamory podcast, and we've been producing Multiamory for over 10 years now. We have over 500 episodes, and so Multiamory is a weekly podcast that translates mainstream research on relationships, but centers non-traditional relationships. So yeah, multi-amory is one of my favorite things, and I'm just like so excited and like so feel so incredibly fortunate that I get to do that with my life. But outside of multi-amory, I also work as a coach and also as a somatic experiencing practitioner, working primarily with non-monogamous individuals, not exclusively, but primarily with non-monogamous individuals, couples, dyads, triads, polycules, and more.
Beautiful. Amazing. And you're also a book author of two books now.
Yeah, so yeah, in 2017, I published The Smart Girl's Guide to Polyamory, and then in 2023, myself and my two co-hosts on the podcast published Multiamory: Essential Tools for Modern Relationships, which is a distillation of all of like our most popular communication tools and hacks and frameworks that we developed over the course of the last 10 years of the podcast. I'm currently working on developing a book proposal for a new book about jealousy. That's still in the works. It's still very much in its prenatal infancy, but I'm very, very excited about that.
I'm super excited about that too. I can't wait to read what you have to say about that. And by the way, I'm just now diving into the Multiamory book because it's finally out on
Oh, nice.
audio, and I only really listen to books anymore. So it's really amazing so far. So thank you
Oh, I'm
for
so
showing.
glad.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a huge victory. Actually, we had a long delay between when our print book was published and when the audiobook was published. It was just published a couple weeks ago. Because yeah, I can't go into too many of the details, but it was sort of an uphill battle with our publisher to get them to let Emily be the one to read the audiobook. But we won that battle. And we're so excited because of course, like so many people who follow us obviously are audio people, right? And so to finally be able to offer an audiobook version of it is very exciting.
Yes. So cool. I'm so glad you won that battle.
Me
Well,
too.
I'm super curious about learning about the evolution of you as a practitioner, as someone who coaches people. Like, when did you start working with non-monogamous folks, and how were you working with them back then? What tools and methods did you have, and how has that evolved over the years?
Yeah, it's evolved quite a lot. I mean, I started dabbling with working with people back in, I want to say 2015 or so. I had been non-monogamous for several years at that point, and we had just launched the podcast. The podcast was starting to pick up a tiny bit of steam. I had done some print interviews, had done some TV appearances, so like I was starting to get some attention in the sense of I started getting people from across the country and across the world starting to hit me up on like Facebook, like sliding into my DMs, people being like, wow, like I had no idea that polyamory was a thing. I had no idea that non-monogamy was a thing. I had no idea that people could do this. This feels like this really resonates with me. Like, can you help me? Can you help me figure this out? Or maybe people reaching out being like, I've been non-monogamous, closeted for a really long time, and I'm running into this issue. Can you help me like sort this out? And at the time, I was just starting again to work on the proposal for my first book. And I felt very overwhelmed because I'm like, I don't know how to help people. Like, I can talk about my own personal experience, but like, I have no idea how to help people here, right? And so I thought, well, I don't really want to go into like working with clients. Like I don't really want this to be my main thing, but like maybe I can go get some training and like, I can work with a couple people to get some practice. And then mostly I wanted to get trained as a coach to help it inform writing the book. That was actually my main intention. So I initially just started like relatively low stakes with like, getting some coaching training through ICF. And then when I actually started working with people, realized like, oh, actually, I really enjoy this work. There's something really different about it. There's something really fulfilling about it. And it changed my relationship to work, my work in general. And so from there, then it was like really hard because it's like, okay, actually, I want to keep working with people. I want to get more training. Um, and at the time, and to a certain extent, still to this day, like really hard to find um, continuing education training that centers non-traditional relationships. And back in like 2015, 2016, 2017 or so, like there was zero of that, right? So after getting my coaching training, like the next place that I moved to was I did the first two levels of the Gottman Institute training. And I absolutely love the Gottman Institute and their research. And famously, they've been like relatively anti non-monogamy, maybe in the past few years have shifted into like a more neutral stance perhaps, or where they're kind of avoiding commenting on it as it's become more popular and they're getting asked about it more often. So did the Gottman training, started working and getting some like healing shame continuing education training out of the Healing Shame Center in Berkeley. Now, all of this training I absolutely loved and just ate it up and loved bringing it to my clients. And the I guess the through line is that like all of the training I was getting was like very cognitive and very heady. And I'm a very cognitive and very heady person, right? Like I love to intellectualize. And so especially the Gottman stuff, which is like so research oriented and they're so specific about the findings of their research, it's just so rich. And I absolutely loved it. It was like really, really good for my brain. And the somatic stuff didn't show up for me until much later, actually, which I'm sure I'll get to briefly here. But I just wanted to highlight that like Marie, I think you and I are similar in that way that like I think we're very like brain first people.
Yes.
Like we like to nerd out about things.
Totally. Let's intellectualize first. Let's build a roadmap, before we venture out.
Hmm.
Make sure we can
Hmm.
wrap our mind around something.
Yes.
So,
Yeah. 100%.
yeah. Oh my gosh, that's so cool to hear some of your, some of your evolution as a practitioner, as a coach, as a thinker. So, yeah, when did you notice the need to branch out outside of the more intellectual, mental focused cognitive, therapy and counseling techniques?
Yeah, so the big turning point for me, which was also a big turning point in my life, was that, I've shared this story on the podcast before, and so I won't go into like too much detail, but around 2016, 2017, around the similar time, I ended up in a relationship that became physically abusive, unfortunately. Um, it was a really dark chapter in my life. I fortunately was able to get myself out of that relationship, and at the time, I just thought, well, that's the most important thing, right? I just like, I get out of the relationship, I free myself from this relationship, and then I can move on with my life, and then everything's going to be fine, right? And at the time, yes, that was the most important thing to do. But what happened, and this is actually really common for PTSD, for acute traumatic experiences, is that I had a delayed response for the PTSD. So it wasn't until I want to say maybe 5 to 6 months after leaving the relationship that I started having physical PTSD symptoms.
Mhm.
Which again, I want to reiterate, like that's actually very common. Like sometimes people can be surprised by that. They can feel like after they got through an acute traumatic experience, and they might think like, oh, I got through that and I was fine, and then be really confused when the symptoms show up later. But that's actually really common. And so I was experiencing this whole host of physical symptoms where I felt like my body was just like not in my control, right? So having random flashbacks, having random, my heart starting to race all of a sudden and like hyperventilating and like having these like really classic PTSD triggers. Um, and I thought that I could just like push my way through it and just intellectualize my way through it, right? Um, I did reach a point where finally I was like, okay, I need to get into therapy to deal with this specifically. Like I can't deal with this on my own anymore. And so I got into talk therapy. And the talk therapy was very important, like it definitely helped me again, myself being this like intellect forward person, helped me to create some better narratives around what had happened to me. It helped me to change the story to understand, okay, I know this isn't my fault. I can start to understand why these things happened and how I got into this situation. Like I can kind of start to weave this into my story and figure it out. However, what I found was that therapy was an absolute drag, as in, like, I dreaded going to my talk therapy sessions. Um, my therapist at the time was, you know, very, very much encouraging me to tell my story and to like talk about what happened. And unfortunately, it meant that like almost every week I was essentially like re-traumatizing myself. I was like reliving it, right? And my therapist is very much encouraging me to also like talk to people in my life about what happened. Which again, like I don't think that was misguided. I don't think that was necessarily wrong. I just think for me, it just didn't come at the right time. So I was like dreading talk therapy because I didn't want to have to relive this horrible thing again. After my talk therapy sessions were done, I would have this huge emotional crash. I would feel more sensitive to triggers for like the whole day afterwards, or maybe 2 days afterwards, or even longer sometimes. And, after spending a good chunk of time in talk therapy, I started to have this sense of like, okay, like my story is changing. The way that I think about what happened to me has changed, and like that's good. However, I feel like everything from the neck down hasn't gotten it. Like it feels like my brain has gotten it, and it feels like my body is still in the same place. Like I'm still having all these physical PTSD symptoms. I'm still having these like big physical responses when I get triggered. And I think that my care at the time, it was a little bit more of like this focus on symptom management, I would say. This kind of sense of like, yeah, that's going to happen. And like you just kind of find, I guess, like a more cognitive way to kind of create a different narrative around it, and that's how you heal. And I just felt like I was kind of going crazy, right? And I just felt like, oh my God, is it always going to be this way? Like, is my body always going to be reacting in this way? And a close friend of mine, she first turned me on to the work of Peter Levine, who is one of the creators of somatic experiencing therapy. She herself, my friend, had had a lot of experience on the client side receiving somatic therapy, and she really, really recommended it. And after reading a number of books about somatic approaches, I was like so desperate. I knew I was like, okay, I want to try this. I'm not convinced. For all I know, this could be like a scam. Like I really have no idea, but like I want to try. I need to try something different, right? And I was in Los Angeles at the time, and I was so desperate. I was just like, okay, whoever is closest to me, who has availability, who does somatic therapy, I'll go see that person, right? So like, I wasn't even trying to find someone who was queer friendly, wasn't even trying to find someone who was non-monogamy friendly, like all these things that normally would be really important to me. I was just like, I just need to find somebody, right? And I really lucked out in that I happened to find a practitioner who was queer, who was very non-monogamy affirming, without me even having to search for that particular parameter. And for myself, almost from the very first session, almost immediately felt this like sense of relief in the rest of my body, right? Um,
Wow.
like it was almost immediate. And the crazy thing was that in that first session with my therapist, it's like we barely even touched on the narrative of what had happened to me, right? He had like the bare bones, he knew the bare bones, right? But so much of it was just about him guiding my attention towards my experience from the neck down, right? Um, and guiding me through all of the feelings and all of the sensations and everything coming up there. And so I did this deep dive, like I did several months intensive, seeing this therapist once a week, sometimes once every other week or so. And this is controversial for me to say, like, because I think that in our work, to imply that like someone can be healed fully of their trauma or that they need to be fixed of their trauma, like I don't think is a very helpful story for us to be telling people. And so, like, I don't think that's necessarily the case for everybody, but like after I went through this very intensive stint in somatic therapy, I felt like my PTSD was 95% gone, essentially. It was like a total transformation. And so for me, that was like the real Kool-Aid moment, right? Where I was just like, okay, there's something here, right? There's this entire channel of work that I neglected for myself for so long. And there's this entire channel of work that I'm maybe even neglecting with my clients that I have been for years, right? And so that was the thing that inspired me to seek training. So specifically, I sought out the somatic experiencing training. Well, there's many other different schools of somatic therapies that are really wonderful. And so, yeah, I think that like, it, appropriately, I sort of had to like feel it for myself to believe it, right? Like I don't think I would have ended up on this path if I just kind of cognitively thought like, oh, this is a thing that seems like people are doing. Maybe I'll, dabble and kind of get some training and see what it's about. Like I was very much convinced because of my own personal experience.
Yes, yes. Wow. Like the proof is in the pudding.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Gosh.
Yes.
Thank you so much
Yeah.
for sharing that vulnerable story, first of all. I really, really appreciate
Mm-hmm.
that. And it really brings, like this whole process home in terms of your own experience. Oh, thank you, Isaiah, for being here. We have a comment here that, like people appreciate your podcast and people
Oh,
appreciate your
oh,
story.
thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you. Yeah, it's very touching. And yes, when we experience something for ourselves, then we start thinking like, wow, like the whole world needs that. The whole world needs access to that kind of powerful medicine, that kind of powerful methodology,
Mm-hmm.
because frankly, I think the field of psychology is still so young, and there's a lot of different methods, and so many different practitioners will embody different methods, but there's so much to be discovered in terms of therapeutic effectiveness.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, yeah, I'm curious to hear more about then. How did you take that into your practice? Like, did you study somatic experiencing specifically?
Yeah, so it's SE specifically. I got my certification finally completed, I think 2 years ago, maybe 2 years ago and change. No, it's so interesting, and maybe you can relate to this too, Marie. But sometimes when people go to talk therapy, I know this is very much my experience, that if you're someone who's good at words,
Mhm.
you can kind of wordsmith your way around uncomfortable territory. Or at least I know that's the case for me, right? That,
Guilty.
yes, I thought so. I thought so. Um, Guilty for me too. That, intellectualizing is it's not it's like I want to make myself abundantly clear that I'm not saying that like talk therapy is bad or that CBT is bad. I mean, honestly, my 5-year long relationship with my main therapist right now has primarily been talk therapy, right? Like it's really valuable, and really wonderful, and the ability to intellectualize, the ability to put the pieces together and to express them and to be able to express with precision what you're feeling or what your story is, like that's a really, really important skill to have. And I also know that if the conversation is getting into some kind of territory that brings up something charged for me, for myself and for many people, intellectualizing and wordsmithing is a way to distance myself from it in order to not have to actually like feel it in the moment, to not have to feel vulnerable, to not actually have to be with my experience as it is happening.
Yeah, I can totally.
And the reason, yeah, yes. And the reason why I think that this is so important, particularly for my work with non-monogamous clients, is that we occupy a subculture that is full of intellectual concepts, right?
Yes.
Um, we talk so much about deprogramming. We have so many labels and we have so many terms, and I think it's actually a really wonderful thing that like something that this subculture has created, something that many queer subcultures have created, is this sense of like there's this thing that no one is naming and we're going to put a name on it so that we can understand it, right? There's this idea that no one is talking about, but we're going to conceptualize it and bring it into reality, right? And that's a really powerful skill to have, not just on an individual level, but on a community level as well. And it means that I can have people who come to me for work and to work with me, and to give an example is like maybe I might be working with a couple and they are so hung up on, one of them is hung up on like, well, I want it to be non-hierarchical polyamory, and the other person being like, well, no, I want to be your primary, and they're just like caught in a loop around these concepts, right? Often both of them have been like pickled in the resources, these very cognitive resources, and like the checklists of like, well, this is what this type of polyamory looks like, and this is what this type of polyamory looks like, and I want to check that box, and I want to check this box, and I don't think that you wanted to check that box, and things like that. And yeah, I find that people can just be really stuck there. And so for myself to be able to bring in this opportunity for people to not have to rely so much on words, to not have to rely so much on concepts, to bring them into the here and now of like what's actually happening in their inner experience around this and how their partner occurs for them. I find that the work can sometimes happen so much faster, and there can be so much more information that comes out much faster when we do that. Because kind of the funny thing is that when you actually get into your body experience and you're actually tracking sensations and you're actually tracking physical, emotional sensations in your body as they shift and as they change, let's say in response to something that your partner just said, we have a much harder time lying. Like our bodies have a much harder time hiding things and compartmentalizing things in the same way that our brains can compartmentalize things. And I think that's the biggest thing that I find that is what makes somatic work both so powerful and also incredibly scary at the same time, is that I think it's just harder to lie. And when I say lie, I don't mean that like we're showing up and like intentionally lying to a partner or lying to a therapist or things like that. But I do think that there are ways that we distance ourselves, that we protect ourselves, that we disavow the things that we're feeling by overly relying on just kind of talking our way through it, if that makes sense.
Totally. Yes, yes. We can confuse the map with the territory, and
Mm.
we're vulnerable because we stay at that level of, defining the map. Like, oh, this is, what's happening, but you're not really going onto the trail, for example, and just
Yes.
really like, feeling what's true. And
Yes.
sometimes also, I think with the non-monogamous community, like we are so big on ethics, and we want things to look and feel a certain way, and when they don't, there's this cognitive dissonance, and we try to make the reality of the feeling, like match the theory, or like the ideal. And again, I think there's
Yes.
a gift in that, and not just like staying stuck in our immediate experience and seeing like, oh, maybe I could be feeling something different. But
Mm.
it can lead to a kind of spiritual bypass or toxic positivity. I see that actually a lot with compersion. People,
Mm.
coming into my office saying like, well, I, like my mind is in a compersive space, but how do I, get my body to be?
Yeah.
And so yeah, I totally think that I'm guilty of that often. It's like
Yes.
confusing the map for the territory.
Totally. Totally. I'm also guilty of it. I'm super guilty of the spiritual bypassing thing. I have a long, long storied resume of spiritual bypassing as well. So yeah, I feel that.
Yeah. So I'm curious, how do you work with people who come into your coaching practice, whether it's as couples or moresomes or individuals who are struggling with, like the physical sensations of jealousy and insecurity and competition, but want to actually move towards a more, like more easeful, more compersive, non-monogamous life?
Yeah, I mean, I like to think about, any distress signal that's going off in the body, particularly around non-monogamy. Well, if I'm just focusing on, non-monogamous situations, the distress signals that go off, jealousy, insecurity, envy, that these things are like an arrow pointing in a particular direction. Or sometimes I've thought of it, they're like an X-ray that is trying to illuminate things that need to be healed. And that could be things that need to be healed in the external circumstances, as in things that need to be healed in the relationship,
Yeah.
right? It could be pointing towards, oh, actually, there's something in this relationship that I've been neglecting, my partner's been neglecting, that I've wanted for a long time and haven't said anything about, or, oh, there's ways that I haven't been speaking up for years, and it's not until I have this distress signal that I realize I really should have been speaking up this whole time. Or it can be pointing towards the things that need to be healed within yourself. So I don't have any like client stories that I have permission to share, but I will share a story of my own just to give a little bit of like a example of how this can sometimes look. So I want to say like last year sometime, one of my partners was headed out for a first date or maybe a second date, I forget. And bear in mind that like I've been essentially professionally polyamorous for, for like many many years at this point. My entire job is, reading the research and reading the resources and developing the tools and practicing the tools and things like that. So like I have plenty of tools under my belt for dealing with a situation like this, right? When a partner is going out on a date and like maybe I'm having some little wibbly feelings coming up about it or something like that.
Yeah,
I'm
you've
also in a
literally
situation.
written books about this.
What was that?
You've literally written books about it.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm also fortunately in a situation where, like, with this particular partner, the relationship is extremely healthy. I feel very secure. I feel very much like we have good conflict resolution. And if there was something that was missing in the relationship, we'd be able to sort that out, right? But even within that context, I still was like, there's feelings coming up, right? Like, there's something that's coming up in my body. And thought to myself, you know what? I'm actually gonna like sit with this, like instead of just distracting or using any of my like kind of cognitive intellectual tools to get through this, like I'm actually gonna let myself sit and actually feel. I'm actually gonna get really curious about when I go below the neck, what is it that I notice? I always describe it as a wibbly feeling. That's my, language for it. But some people might call it jealousy or envy or primal panic or whatever you want to call it. I got really curious if it's like, let me just actually, first of all, feel it. And as I was trying to observe it just very neutrally, right, and noticing like, okay, I'm noticing like maybe a tightness in my stomach and maybe a little bit of like an unsure, like nauseated feeling that's creeping up in my chest. I'm feeling some warmth. All of a sudden, as I felt that feeling, this image popped into my brain, and it was this extremely vivid memory of myself being 10 years old, maybe 11 years old, and noticing that my mom was an NRE with my stepdad.
Oh, wow.
That was the only image,
Mm,
right? And so I was like, whoa, like did
mm,
not expect that, right? Like I think that if I had just been sitting there just trying to intellectually puzzle through what's going on for me, I don't think I would have gotten there. But there was something about actually feeling the feeling, having the sense that this feeling is familiar, and then it was almost like this instant time machine jump to like, yeah, that was the image. And there was something about that just kind of told me everything that I needed to know, that kind of told me like, wow, like there was something that happened to me very young that I didn't even realize at the time that maybe created this sense of insecurity around like my caregiver being an NRE, right? Now, I share that example. I know it's just like my own personal experience, but like I've basically seen something very similar play out with a lot of my clients who do somatic work that um, I think especially if you're someone like maybe there's been a particular issue in your relationship you've been dealing with for a long time. Maybe you are like the classic example of like, I know that I want this and I've been non-monogamous for a long time. And for some reason, these feelings still keep coming up in this situation that I find that um, if you just feel exhausted, like you've like thought through all of these situations and like you've like thought this whole thing to death, that sometimes just putting the spotlight on everything below your brain can create connections that like you didn't even realize, right? Even going back to like when I was first exploring somatic therapy on the client side for myself, even though I went in to deal with this kind of very acute situation of the domestic violence, I was so surprised by like all the things that came up, right? It felt like this really big unknitting process. And so it's the kind of thing where in this context where I don't want to be taking talk therapy and throwing it in the garbage, like it's still a very important piece of this. And some people who maybe feel like my talk therapy just isn't quite doing it, like, considering a somatic approach may just kind of bring information to the surface that you didn't even realize was affecting you in this particular situation. I could probably give like 10 million more examples like that, but that's just like maybe a little bit of a taste of what I'm talking about here.
yeah, absolutely. Gosh, that's so beautiful. Yeah, because I will say, like, one of the most frequent questions that I get from folks, whether it's in my practice or, like elsewhere about the book is like, okay, Marie, like there is attitudinal compersion, which I defined as, like the thoughts and behaviors that we can have in relation to our partner's positive experience with someone else. Like, it's basically like acting as if you were feeling emotionally compersive. But how do
Mhm.
you bridge that with embodied compersion? Like, how do you actually not only act as if and, act in connection with that ethic, which can be a beautiful form of freedom. Sometimes we don't feel totally aligned with love, but we can still be loving, and that's
Mhm.
great. But, like, how would you guide people to bridge that gap between again, between the map and the territory, between the
Yes.
attitude and the actual embodiment?
Yes. Yeah, totally. So I think that if someone's coming to me and they're very compersion focused, or if they feel like that's very much their goal, I mean, I think that my first level of filtration is looking for the things that you mentioned, Marie, of like, is this a form of spiritual bypassing? Is this a form of toxic positivity, right? Because sometimes I will have people come to me and they will give me this whole laundry list of the ways that their partner has lied to them, has betrayed them, has broken their trust, has not kept them in mind, has not considered them, has neglected them, and they'll give me this whole laundry list of like the history leading up to this point, and then they'll essentially be like, I want you to help me feel compersion.
Yes.
Or I want you to help me feel like none of this bothers me. Like I'm just above it all. I want you to deliver enlightenment essentially into my lap. I'm sure you run into that too with some of your client work. And so some of it is like, okay, let's actually see what the ecosystem is
Yeah.
here, because it's going to be extremely hard for you to jump, you know, 10 miles to the compersion finish line if you're actively dealing with like pain and betrayal and insecurity and ways that your needs are not getting met, right? So that's probably the first thing that I will look at.
Right.
But then second to that, as far as again, like not just looking at the attitudinal concept or the intellectual concept of compersion, feeling this embodied sense, this felt sense, for a very long time, I've very much been in the camp of like, let's celebrate even feelings of neutrality as compersion.
Mhm.
Um,
Yes, yes.
like that's been my attitude too, that like, let's not try to dangle this carrot of it's going to feel amazing and great and you're going to be so joyful and like so warm and fuzzy all the time. And so what that looks like in practice is that sometimes with my clients, again, provided we've kind of gotten through that first filtration stage, that like maybe they're in a place where they feel secure or relatively secure in their relationship. They feel relatively empowered. They have chosen this situation. They're not being coerced in this situation, right? That sometimes it's just tracking when the distress comes up, whether it's the insecurity, the jealousy, the envy, or whatever. Sometimes it's just tracking it as it comes up and then tracking as it softens 5%.
Mm,
And
mm,
that's that, Like, I don't know. I mean, like, I don't know if I would get into the weeds around, like, can we call that 5% softening compersion? I don't know, but it's a direction. It's heading in the direction of, like, less
right,
suffering,
right.
um, which to me feels like it falls on that particular spectrum, right? And so like I want to high five people if they've gotten even to the point of just like, yeah, my partner can go on a date and I can feel relatively neutral about it, right?
Mm,
Maybe like neutral where, or maybe even neutral nudged 5% in the direction of positive, or maybe neutral, although I still feel 5% in the direction of negative. Like I think those are things to still celebrate for sure.
mhm.
I know for myself, like my personal experience of compersion, I will say that also when I first kind of got into non-monogamy, I thought for sure that compersion was just like polyamory PR. I was not convinced that it was it was something real, until I did have like this surprising experience of like I witnessed a partner of mine like kissing his other partner on the cheek, and like when I saw it, like weirdly I felt like these fireworks going off inside me and I felt really joyful and I was just like, what the hell is going on? But I was so glad that I got that experience. And also, I don't often have that experience. My experience of compersion tends to be much more, the word that I want to use is like ho hum, right? It's
Mm.
it's not uh it's not like life changing and it's not like fireworks. It's a lot more subtle, but it is there. And so I think that some of this work when I'm working with people, it can be just learning about like tracking the subtleties that are there and then like still being happy about the fact that it's there.
Okay, I think I just had a bit of an epiphany.
Hmm.
I think that what I've been calling attitudinal compersion is actually not it shouldn't be so starkly contrasted with embodied compersion because it's not actually disembodied. You know,
Hmm.
attitudinal compersion is still an embodied and emotional experience. It's just not, as intense maybe. Like the low hum describing is still a somatic experience that
Yeah.
maybe is not, it's different than being in a state of embodied distress and trying
Yes.
to put a label of, no, I want to be compersive, but really I'm not
Yes.
feeling anything near peaceful. Like that's
Yes.
different.
Yes.
And I think it's important to make that nuance. And I've never really articulated that in my work. And you just helped me kind of start disentangling those
I'm
things.
so glad. No, I think that that makes total sense because yeah, I think that's the thing, and kind of coming back to what I was saying earlier about how like the body has a much harder time lying. That like
Mm-hmm.
if I'm working with someone who is in an embodied state of distress and they're trying to say the words, no, but I want this, no, but this is okay, no, but I wish this person well or whatever, that like if we're tracking what's happening in the body, it's very hard for them to deny what's actually happening,
Yeah.
right? Versus what I think maybe what you see in folks who aren't in distress, they are like, okay, yeah, I'm adopting this attitudinal compersion, but I don't quite feel like it's embodied yet. Like there has to be enough of a shift in your nervous system to even allow you to be able to say that without it feeling like a complete, I don't know what the word is, but like without it feeling like an offense to your body and to your emotions and your sensibility.
Right, right, right. Without having that dissonance, as you
Yes.
said.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's amazing. So, gosh, I'm so excited that we're having this conversation. This feels so illuminating and relevant to everything I'm curious about. And I'm looking at my notes here of what else I wanted to ask you about. Um, let's see.
I
Oh,
can talk about who, oh, sorry, go ahead.
well, I was going to ask, like, do you think that somatic therapy is ill-advised for anyone? Are there people who are just not really ready to go below the neck, or for whom it's not a productive route?
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so I can kind of start like top level and work my way down. Like I think top level, contraindications for somatic therapy, I would say is any health condition or any mental health condition that makes it difficult, that can complicate your relationship with reality.
Hmm.
So, I mean, that means things like different forms of psychosis or paranoid schizophrenia or things like that. Not that that means like you can never, ever, ever do somatic therapy, but it's kind of like if that's like your main mental health issue that you're working on managing right now, that somatic therapy may not be the best fit. Part of that being that for some people, not all people, but for some people, and myself, I include in this, like sometimes a very intense somatic session can almost feel like being on psychedelics. In the sense of like you can sort of have these a little bit like sometimes disassociative, sometimes coming back from being disassociative, sometimes having like a lot of intense like memories and images coming up for you, having like body sensations that you weren't expecting. And so I think it is just really important to be able to have a sense that like, and hopefully having a practitioner that you trust enough that like you can go there, you can go to these intense places, but you also have a way of coming out of it easily, essentially. So that's one thing to consider. I would say that my biggest, I think my biggest thing is just that like I just encourage people if they're curious about somatic therapy to be ready for it. And I know that's very generic and very cryptic. But because of what we've been talking about, how like the body is hard to compartmentalize, it basically it means like just like be ready for the roller coaster. And hopefully it's like a roller coaster. Like a good roller coaster is one where it's like you feel strapped in, you feel secure, right? And then you're ready to just like go have a fun time, even though that fun time might involve some terror and some thrills and adrenaline and stuff like that. And so it's just to let people know that like a lot of stuff is likely to come up with somatic therapy. Maybe stuff that you thought was resolved or stuff that like you didn't really want to deal with in this particular session or things like that. And so I think it's about just like being mentally prepared. And ideally, like if you find a practitioner that you trust and like you know, who's worth their salt, essentially, they will also be able to like very much ease you in to that work. Not with all somatic therapies, but I know with my practice with somatic experiencing, practitioners are trained to never go to ground zero on like the first session, right? So the way that you might with talk therapy, where it's like, okay, I want to deal with this like acute traumatic situation from my childhood, and you might show up to talk therapy, and some therapists might be like, okay, great, like let's talk about it right now, right? With somatic experiencing therapy, generally that's really discouraged. That like we ease into this very slowly and very gently. We kind of sidestep into it because going into ground zero can bring up a lot for people. So that's like both a point of caution and also a point of encouragement. So like if you're someone who like if you have a big traumatic past, if there's things that you haven't quite dealt with or haven't quite processed, on the one hand, just a word of caution that like you're going to be dealing with it, you know, like it's going to be harder for you to avoid it and like intellectualize around it. And also to know that like no one is going to force you to, you know, share about anything that you don't want to share, to verbalize anything you don't want to verbalize. Like in a lot of somatic therapies, the client is very much in control, right? And so it's like if anything gets like too intense, like we can always come back out of it. So both that kind of like caution of just like be ready to deal with stuff, but also you don't need to be scared that someone's going to force you to just like spill your guts right away, you know. That kind of the whole point of this work is like creating a container for you and for your nervous system and for your body to start to relax and to feel safe and feel safe to feel things. But ultimately, like the underline that I want to make on this is that I won't be the one to claim that somatic therapy is 100% hands down for everybody. I'm not going to make the claim that it's going to produce the same results for absolutely everybody. However, I am comfortable to make the claim that I think all of us could benefit from more opportunities to remember and to feel that we're not just a floating head. Our culture really heavily encourages us to just kind of feel like a floating head looking at a device most of the time, right? And there's so much that happens downstairs, and so much of our culture encourages us to deny it, to muffle it, to distract away from it, to numb it, and there is such a rich life to be found within this body.
Yeah, wow, thank you for that. Yeah, the way that I kind of picture it, and I'm a big fan of, you know, coaching and therapy, and I've never gone to a somatic therapist per se, someone who labeled themselves like that, but um, my interpretation of healing is, you know, really that there is emotional pain stored in our body from all the experiences, all the negative experiences that we have internalized and not been able to release in the moment. And that when we bring them to the surface, you know, with a loving presence, with someone that we actually trust in a very safe container, then that emotional pain has a chance to be felt, but in a way that it has a chance to be released. Almost like, you know, like you're boiling water and it gets to evaporate into a
Yes.
steam. And um, and yes, we can't do that just, you know, mentally by thinking about it. You know, like we have to feel it, and we
Yes.
can't feel without involving the body.
Yes.
So
Yes. 100%. Yeah. And some of this work is also, you know, guiding a client into a scary place where there's an uncomfortable feeling that's coming up, and instead of shying away from the uncomfortable feeling, like we sit with it and then we watch it as it shifts and as it changes. And sometimes it shifts and it intensifies, sometimes it shifts and it actually disappears and decreases, and sometimes it shifts into something else entirely, right? And so some of it is like building up this tolerance for not being as scared of your own feelings, right?
yes,
Yeah,
yes. Oh my gosh,
yeah,
that's such key.
Mhm.
Being too scared of our feelings.
Yeah, yeah,
Absolutely. And I
yeah.
love, just to kind of ping back to something you said about jealousy earlier, like you called it, what is the word that you used?
Like an X-ray, or like sometimes it like I kind of go back and forth between like the X-ray image or like the arrow image, like a signpost pointing in a particular
Oh,
direction.
it was when you said you were sitting with it and you were like, oh, it's kind of like, not like a frubble, or it was
Oh,
like
wibbly,
a wiggly,
wibbly,
yes.
wibbly. Yeah.
And, to me, it's about kind of like almost like relating to our emotions in ways that, like we can look at them as cute little monsters, or, like things that are not so intimidating. Like sometimes just
Mm,
which we use, like wiggly, like that doesn't sound like horrible, or it doesn't sound like something that's going to come and kill you.
mm,
It's like, oh, vulnerable, and it's like, oh, it's uncomfortable, but there's something sweet almost about it. Like you get
mm.
it.
Yes, yes. Yeah, yeah. A lot of the work, both the work that I did on the client side and often the work that I'm doing with people is, um, I'm always, and I still get surprised by this, but like sometimes the parts of ourselves that we feel the most annoyed by, or the parts of ourselves that we wish would just go away. So it's like maybe it's the part of yourself that's petty, the part of yourself that feels envy, the part of yourself that feels jealous, or the part of yourself that feels rage. Often these parts are actually our greatest allies in a particular situation. And maybe they're operating at like 150% and we need to find a way to make friends with them, and listen to them so that they feel comfortable dialing down the volume dial a little bit. But yeah, a surprising amount of my work is like actually like all the things that you wish that you weren't feeling or that wish you could just scrub away or magic wand away, that like these things are actually here trying to be your friend and trying to be your ally. And sometimes again, we can think about that in an intellectual way about like making friends with this part of myself. But it's very different when we're actually able to feel that shift in the relationship between ourselves and these different protective mechanisms that come up for us.
Yes, yes. Oh my gosh, and what a shift that
Mm-hmm.
is.
Mm-hmm.
So I see one question in the chat, and then we're gonna wrap up. But someone is asking, how does this, meaning somatic experiencing or somatic counseling, differ from EMDR? What
Yeah, so there's definitely some overlaps with EMDR for sure. I mean, both approaches are essentially about um, encouraging the client to face uncomfortable feelings, uncomfortable, painful memories, and finding a way to essentially reduce their charge and kind of reduce that fear that comes up around even touching into these things. EMDR is based on this idea of like, bilateral stimulation, and also like bilateral eye movement, where like they've found that there's something about the bilateral stimulation and the eye movement that somehow helps to reduce that charge. Sort of the weird thing is like there's been some research on EMDR and like people have found that it's effective and like we're still figuring out what the actual mechanism of action
Mhm.
is there. And then somatic therapy, somatic experiencing, there's sort of a similar principle, but there's less of this focus on, I guess, the what would I call it? The structure of there needing to be like a bilateral stimulation of some kind. I also think the difference wise is that my impression of EMDR is like EMDR is maybe a little more focused on kind of getting you to ground zero a little bit faster. EMDR practitioners, not all of them, but like I think in the training are a little more encouraged to kind of get more to the heart of things a little bit faster. And what I found that with somatic training, like we tend to ease off the gas a little bit on those things and like maybe don't dive into ground zero right away. But so yeah, I think those would be my very broad strokes compare and contrast with somatic therapies and EMDR.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then there was another question from a little bit earlier, basically asking, this pattern is repeating itself in my poly-anchor relationship, and it's being interpreted as my inability to manage this relationship style. Is this done with couples?
Mm. Yeah, so yeah, somatic therapy is definitely done with couples. With in the somatic experiencing world specifically, myself personally, I've only found like a handful of people who are like using somatic experiencing with couples to like really, really amazing transformative effects. But couples work is not officially part of their training. So I think a lot of practitioners are kind of like improvising, like trying to find ways in order to implement this. I'm one of those, like also like improvising and just kind of trying to figure out ways to implement this into couples work. I have to give a shout out to my colleague, Arit Krug, who is my colleague that I've been running these somatic therapy retreats with for polyamorous folks recently. That Orit specifically, she's not a somatic therapist, but she's a dance and movement therapist, which is sort of, adjacent. Um, and she does work or historically has done work with couples that's a lot more movement focused, also with like some absolutely amazing results. So yeah, so I would say that like somatic work for sure can help out couples, because especially couples, um, the same thing that you can get into the same like talking loops around stuff, and talking loops and me taking my stance and you taking your stance can be yet another way to distance ourselves from each other and to avoid being vulnerable with each other. And so sometimes I will work with folks like sort of taking turns with like we'll focus on one person and I'll kind of guide them through what's happening in their body and being able to feel that and being able to express some of that and just having the other person being there and witnessing. Sometimes I might have them and get movement involved. But ultimately, I would say like this is a field where I would love to see so much more research and so many more resources around the intersection of somatic work and couples work. And hopefully more of that will unfold in the coming years.
I think it will. I mean, just like when I think about like 10 years ago, you barely heard the word somatic, in the psychology field, and now
Mhm.
it's there. So I think there's
Yeah,
necessarily going to be more research and more practitioners, orienting towards that. It
yeah,
just feels like an important neglected part of psychology and healing. So thank you
yeah,
for being part of that movement and bringing that wisdom to the non-monogamous community, because it's just so
yes,
essential to bring all of these tools and modalities to go beyond the surface.
yeah,
So yeah, super
yeah.
excited for your groundbreaking work. I
Oh,
really feel like it.
thank you. Thank you. And I want to encourage people, and I hope that um, I can be an inspiration for this, and that Marie, you can be an inspiration for this. That if you're someone who identifies as being like very left brain intellectual, like you could still do this work,
Yeah,
essentially. Yeah. Hmm.
totally,
Yeah.
totally. Yeah. And I think, I mean, there is so much value in being left brain and wanting to establish what the territory is and the theory. Like, there's so much to be gained from that. But, if you never actually like hit your boots on the grounds, you're going to stay stuck. And yeah, I think it's very necessary to be role models
Yeah.
for what we're talking about. So.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much, Dedeker, for this amazing conversation.
Thank
This has been so
you.
heartwarming and stimulating, and I'm learning so much from you.
Mm.
Very, very
Mm.
cool.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me on. It's always a wonderful conversation. Is it okay if I plug some of my stuff before we wrap up here?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Um, yeah, so basically, if people want to get in touch with me, you can go to dedekerwinston.com. Or if you just like follow me on Instagram, you can find a link to my website in my bio. If you want to listen to my podcast, that's Multiamory Podcast. It's pretty much wherever you get your podcasts, or you can follow us on Instagram at multiamory_podcast. If you're interested in the somatic retreats that I've been talking about, you can either send me a DM on Instagram. I also have a link in my bio that directly links to the page that I run with Orit that has more information about that. We're running our next somatic therapy retreat for non-monogamous folks in late September in northern Spain. We actually just got our venue all set up for that, and so we're super excited for that.
Oh my gosh, that's so cool. You always pick the best locations.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, like location is important. Like when you're thinking about the environment that you want your body to be in doing this sort of intensive work.
Yes, exactly. It's a
Mhm.
somatic experience.
Mhm.
Totally.
Mhm.
Oh my gosh, amazing. So thank you everyone for tuning in. If everyone wants to connect with my work on compersion, you can go in the link in my bio at Dr. Marie Cohen. You can find my book on compersion and you can find my coaching website. So please feel free to reach out and join my mailing list and just continue learning. I'm excited to have more conversations with people like you and leaders and researchers and practitioners so we can all benefit from that expanded knowledge.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you all for being here and participating and for your questions, and we will see you later.
Yeah.
Bye, Dedeker.
Bye.
Thank you.